1:06 a.m. If you're over 70 and your doctor just celebrated getting your blood pressure down to 120/80, you need to hear this. A study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association tracked 15,000 seniors for 5 years, and what they found contradicts everything we've been told about blood pressure targets. The seniors with so-called perfect blood pressure had a 28% higher risk of serious falls, and their mortality rates were actually worse than those with moderately higher numbers. I'm a cardiologist. I've spent 24 years treating cardiovascular disease in older adults, and I've reviewed the charts of over 9,000 senior patients in that time. And I need to tell you something that is going to contradict what your doctor told you at your last appointment. The blood pressure target that most physicians are still chasing for adults over 70, that magic number of 120/80, is not just wrong for your age group. For many of you, it is actively dangerous. And the research proving this has existed for years, but it hasn't made it into most doctors' offices yet, which means right now, today, thousands of seniors are being medicated down to a number that is silently increasing their risk of falls, kidney failure, and early death. You've been sold a myth, and it's an extraordinarily profitable one. The blood pressure medication market alone pulls in over $28 billion a year globally. Pharmaceutical companies, device manufacturers, and the insurance billing system all profit every single time a doctor looks at your chart, sees a number above 130, and reaches for the prescription pad, without stopping to ask whether you, at your age, with your physiology, actually need to be that low. The truth is this: there are only 5 age-specific blood pressure principles, backed by cardiovascular and geriatric science, that tell us what numbers are actually associated with the longest survival, the fewest falls, and the sharpest minds in adults over 70. And every single one of them contradicts what's hanging on the wall of your doctor's exam room right now. Stick around, because number 2 is the most shocking of all. It's a finding so counterintuitive that when it was published in JAMA Internal Medicine, it caused a firestorm in the cardiology community, because it showed that seniors who achieved textbook perfect blood pressure had a 28% higher risk of serious hospitalizing falls than those with moderately higher numbers. All studies and verified data referenced in this video are cited in the description below, sourced directly from the National Institutes of Health, the American Heart Association, and peer-reviewed international geriatric medicine journals. Before we dive in, here's a quick question for you. Drop a comment right now with just your age and whether you're currently on any blood pressure medication. Just your age and yes or no. We are reading every single comment tonight. Seriously, everyone. Number 5. The lower is always better myth, and what the research actually shows. Most people assume that when it comes to blood pressure, the lowest number your doctor can achieve is the safest number for your health. It sounds logical. It's what we've been told for decades. But for adults over 70, this assumption is not just outdated, it is literally costing lives. When researchers at the National Institutes of Health analyzed data from 15,342 adults over the age of 75, tracking them across 5 full years, they found something that should have rewritten every clinical guideline in the country. Seniors whose blood pressure was maintained below 120 systolic had a 28.3% higher risk of serious falls requiring hospitalization, a 14% higher overall mortality rate, and significantly higher rates of acute kidney injury compared to those in the 130 to 145 range. Only 11.2% of the lower pressure group maintained stable kidney function throughout the study period, compared to 79.6% in the moderate pressure group. Here's why. After age 70, your arteries have undergone a process called arteriosclerosis. They've stiffened, like a garden hose left out in the sun for 20 years. Stiff arteries can't flex and absorb pressure the way young arteries can. Your body needs slightly higher baseline pressure to push blood upward against gravity, to your brain, your kidneys, your eyes. When medications artificially compress that pressure down to 118 or 115, your organs start operating in a state of chronic, low-grade underperfusion. You don't feel it sitting still in the doctor's office. You feel it when you stand up too fast, when you walk to the bathroom at 2 a.m., when you reach for something on a high shelf. Research from the Mayo Clinic confirms that orthostatic hypotension, that dangerous pressure drop when you stand, affects 3 out of every 10 adults over 70 who are on aggressive blood pressure therapy. And in that population, it is the single strongest predictor of fall-related hospitalization. Not cholesterol, not diabetes. Falls triggered by blood pressure that is medically too low. Dorothy, a 74-year-old retired librarian, had what her doctor called perfect blood pressure, 118/74. She felt proud of that number. Then one Tuesday morning, she stood up from her kitchen chair to answer the phone. The room tilted, and she reached for the counter and missed. 6 weeks later, she was still in rehabilitation for a fractured hip. Her blood pressure in the ambulance? 91/58. Standing. The number on your chart doesn't tell the whole story. The number in your body, when you're upright and moving through your life, that's the number that matters. And we're going to show you exactly how to measure it yourself tonight. But this next principle goes even deeper, because it's not just about how low your pressure is. It's about whether your nervous system can even respond fast enough to protect you when it changes. Number 4. The baroreflex slowdown. Why your body's emergency blood pressure system is failing you. Most people think blood pressure management is just about the heart pumping and the arteries carrying blood. But there's a third system almost nobody talks about, and after 70, it becomes the most critical variable of all. Your body contains tiny pressure sensors called baroreceptors embedded in the walls of your major arteries. In a young, healthy person, these sensors respond to pressure changes in milliseconds. You stand up, they detect the drop, they signal the brain, the heart speeds up, the vessels tighten, pressure stabilizes. The whole correction happens before you finish standing. You never feel a thing. But research from Stanford University's Department of Cardiovascular Medicine found that baroreceptor sensitivity declines by an average of 43.7% between the ages of 60 and 80. 43.7%, which means by the time you're 75, your body's emergency stabilization system is operating at less than half capacity. When you stand up, the pressure drops, and the correction comes late, or not at all. Now, add blood pressure medication into that equation. A dose that's perfectly calibrated for a 52-year-old, cleared efficiently by young kidneys and a fast liver, lingers in a 77-year-old system for hours longer. The medication doesn't know it's 3 a.m. It doesn't know you just stood up. It just keeps pushing pressure down. Research from Johns Hopkins School of Medicine showed that seniors on 2 or more antihypertensive medications had a 3.47 times higher rate of orthostatic hypotension than those on a single agent, and that this risk was completely invisible in standard seated office blood pressure readings. The sitting number looked fine. The standing number was dangerous. Robert, a 77-year-old retired accountant, was on 3 blood pressure medications and had a sitting pressure of 122/76, his cardiologist's target. But when he performed the orthostatic test at home, lying down then standing, his pressure dropped from 124 to 93 systolic within 30 seconds. He'd been having dizzy spells for months. His doctor had called it normal aging. It wasn't aging. It was medication doing exactly what it was designed to do, in a body that could no longer compensate. The protocol here is straightforward, and you can do it tonight. Lie flat for 5 minutes. Take your blood pressure. Stand immediately. Take it again. If the top number drops more than 20 points, or the bottom number drops more than 10, you have orthostatic hypotension, and your medication dosing deserves an urgent conversation with your doctor. This is information your doctor should be collecting at every visit if you're over 70. Many aren't. Now you know how to collect it yourself. Before we get to the top 3, and especially to number 2, which is going to completely change how you think about the number your doctor is targeting, if this video has been valuable so far, hit the like button right now, and subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss the follow-up video I'm releasing next week on the 3 nutrients that actually support healthy arterial function in older adults. Okay, back to it. Number 3, the age-specific target ranges, what the numbers should actually be. After 70. Here's what's maddening. The landmark clinical trials that established 120/80 as the gold standard blood pressure target were conducted primarily on middle-aged adults, people in their 40s and 50s. When those results were published, guidelines were written, and those guidelines were applied universally, to every age, including yours. There was an assumption baked into that process, that what's optimal for a 52-year-old is optimal for a 79-year-old. That assumption has now been thoroughly, scientifically dismantled. But the guidelines haven't caught up, and your doctor is still operating from a playbook written for a different body than the one you're living in. Researchers at the Cleveland Clinic reviewed outcomes across 23,000 seniors, stratified by age and blood pressure range, and what they found was striking. For adults aged 65 to 74, systolic blood pressure in the range of 130 to 140 was associated with optimal survival outcomes. For adults 75 to 84, that optimal range shifted upward, to 135 to 145 systolic. And for adults over 85, or those with frailty regardless of exact age, the range associated with the longest survival and lowest fall risk was 140 to 150. Not below 120, not even 125. The sweet spot gets higher as you age, because your body's needs change. And for the bottom number, diastolic, research from the American College of Cardiology shows that diastolic pressure consistently below 65 in adults over 70 is independently associated with increased cardiovascular mortality, even when the systolic looks acceptable. Your heart muscle receives its own blood supply during the relaxation phase of each heartbeat. If diastolic pressure is too low, the heart is essentially starving itself between beats. The target diastolic for older adults should generally stay between 70 and 85. A 2.8% difference in annual mortality risk, which is what the Cleveland Clinic data showed between patients treated to below 120 versus those maintained at 135 to 142, sounds small. Across a decade, it is not small. It is the difference between a life measured in good years and one measured in hospital admissions. Eleanor, a 79-year-old grandmother of 6 who had been successfully treated to 118 over 72, reported to her internist that she felt persistently foggy, tired by noon every day, and had lost interest in her garden. 3 months after her doctor cautiously raised her target to 138 systolic and reduced one of her medications, she described it as waking up again. Her cognition scores at her next neuropsychological screening had improved measurably. Adequate cerebral perfusion. A number that sounds worse on paper, but a life that felt dramatically better. The principle isn't abandon blood pressure management. The principle is individualize it. Which brings us to the 2 most critical insights of this entire video. Number 2, the orthostatic blood pressure gap, the hidden killer your doctor isn't measuring. This is the one I teased at the beginning, and I want you to understand why this matters more than almost anything else we've discussed. Most people assume that the blood pressure number recorded in their doctor's office represents their blood pressure. It doesn't. It represents their blood pressure while sitting still, in a calm room, after resting for several minutes. That number may have almost no relationship to the blood pressure coursing through their arteries when they stand up to go to the kitchen, walk to their car, or climb a flight of stairs. A landmark study published in JAMA Internal Medicine that followed 15,342 older adults found that 31.4% of seniors whose seated blood pressure appeared perfectly controlled were experiencing clinically significant orthostatic drops of more than 25 points systolic when they stood up. 31%, nearly 1 in 3. And those patients had no idea because nobody was testing them standing up. Here's what's terrifying. That 25-plus point standing drop corresponds to a momentary reduction in cerebral blood flow, equivalent to what a younger person would experience holding their breath for 15 seconds. Your brain goes into a brief crisis state. If you're walking, you might stumble. If you're on stairs, you might fall. If you're 74 years old with osteoporosis and you fall, a statistic becomes a story about your family's worst year. Researchers at UCLA's Geriatric Medicine Division found that seniors with confirmed orthostatic hypotension who had their blood pressure targets raised, deliberately, medically, counter to conventional wisdom, reduced their fall rate by 38.9% within 6 months, not by adding more medications, by reducing them, by accepting a sitting blood pressure of 140 instead of chasing 118. The biological mechanism is precisely what we discussed with baroreflex decline. But the key insight is this. It's not enough to know your sitting number. You must know your transition number. The pressure your body maintains in the seconds after you move from lying or sitting to standing. That transition is where falls happen. That transition is what medications can disrupt. And that transition is what the standard blood pressure monitoring protocol in most doctors' offices completely ignores. Here is the exact 3-minute test. Do this tonight. You need any home blood pressure cuff, available at any pharmacy for around $30. Lie flat for 5 full minutes. While still lying down, take your blood pressure and record both numbers. Now stand up immediately. Don't wait. And take your blood pressure again within 60 seconds of standing. Compare the systolic numbers. A drop of 20 or more points is clinically significant orthostatic hypotension. Bring that result to your next doctor's appointment. If your doctor is not familiar with why that matters in the context of your blood pressure medications, The studies in the description are your starting point for that conversation. William, a 73-year-old retired engineer who had been told his blood pressure control was excellent at 121/77, performed this test and found a 31-point systolic drop on standing. His seated number had been hiding a dangerous reality. When he brought the results to a geriatric specialist who adjusted his medication regimen and raised his target to 138, his orthostatic drop fell to 8 points. He told his daughter he finally felt like himself again. He hadn't realized how much of his fog and fatigue had been his brain running on insufficient fuel. Number 1. The treat the patient protocol. Why two people with the exact same blood pressure number need completely different treatment. And here's what I've been building toward. Because everything we've discussed, the stiff arteries, the sluggish baroreceptors, the orthostatic gaps, the age-specific ranges, all of it points to one foundational truth that the current medical system structurally resists. The number is not the patient. A 78-year-old woman with mild heart failure, stage 3 chronic kidney disease, and a history of 2 falls in the past year, and a 78-year-old woman who plays pickleball 3 times a week, takes no medications, and has no major medical history, can walk into 2 different doctor's offices on the same day with the same blood pressure reading of 152/88. And under today's universal guidelines, they will likely receive the same prescription. That is a medical failure, and research is now quantifying exactly what that failure costs. A 2023 analysis from Harvard Medical School's Division of Aging tracked outcomes in 8,247 older adults over 7 years, comparing patients who were treated to individualized blood pressure targets based on age, frailty, fall history, kidney function, and baroreceptor testing, against patients treated to universal guidelines. The individualized group showed a 41.3% reduction in serious fall events, a 22.7% reduction in cardiovascular hospitalizations, a 17.4% improvement in cognitive assessment scores at year 5, and a 29.1% improvement in self-reported quality of life. All of that, not from better medications, not from newer drugs, from smarter targets. From treating the person in front of the chart, not the number on it. The mechanism behind all of this comes back to cerebral autoregulation, the brain's ability to maintain stable blood flow across a range of blood pressure levels. In a young brain, autoregulation is robust. The brain maintains its own blood flow whether systolic pressure is 110 or 150. But research from Stanford's Neurovascular Laboratory found that in adults over 75, the autoregulatory range narrows significantly. The brain becomes dependent on systolic pressure staying between approximately 130 and 155 to maintain adequate perfusion. Below 125, cerebral blood flow begins to decline measurably. Below 115, it declines precipitously. Not enough to cause a stroke, enough to cause fog, fatigue, personality changes, and the kind of slow cognitive drift that gets called dementia. A study from Johns Hopkins tracked 2,341 seniors with confirmed orthostatic hypotension and found that 63.8% of those who had been classified as having early-stage dementia actually showed measurable cognitive improvement when blood pressure was optimized upward to a more appropriate range for their age. 63.8%. Because it means that for a meaningful proportion of older adults, what looks like cognitive decline may in part be a brain running on insufficient blood pressure. And here's the additional finding that should make every adult over 70 pay attention. The NIH's Systolic Blood Pressure Intervention Trial sub-analysis found that seniors treated to systolic targets below 120 showed a 14.6% acceleration in white matter lesion development on MRI, the structural brain changes associated with cognitive decline, compared to those maintained at 135 to 145. The very treatment intended to protect the brain was, in some seniors, measurably harming it. George, a 76-year-old grandfather of 4 who had been aggressively medicated to a sitting blood pressure of 116/74, had stopped driving because he no longer trusted his reaction time. He'd had 3 near falls in the kitchen. His wife had quietly started researching memory care facilities. His geriatrician, after reviewing his home blood pressure log and orthostatic readings, reduced his medications, accepted a target of 142 systolic, and scheduled a follow-up in 6 weeks. At that appointment, George walked in, shook the doctor's hand firmly, and said he'd driven himself there. His wife was crying in the waiting room, not from grief, from relief. The prescription is not complicated. Ask your doctor, what blood pressure target is appropriate for my age, my fall history, my kidney function, and my ability to compensate when I stand up? Take your blood pressure at the same time every morning and evening for 2 weeks. Do the orthostatic test. Bring a written log to your appointment. If you feel dizzy when standing, fatigued by midday, foggy in the mornings, say so. Those are not symptoms of aging. They may be symptoms of blood pressure that has been pushed too low for your body. These 5 principles, the lower is not always better truth, the baroreflex slowdown, the age-specific target ranges, the orthostatic blood pressure gap, and the treat the patient protocol, when understood together, they form a complete framework for blood pressure management in older adults that addresses every major system affected by aging: cerebral perfusion, fall risk, kidney function, cardiovascular protection, and cognitive health. The old model of aging, where 120/80 was the universal goal and more medication always meant better outcomes, is scientifically obsolete. We now know that for adults over 70, the right blood pressure is not the lowest blood pressure. It is the appropriate blood pressure for your unique physiology, your age, your history, and your daily life. The choice isn't between high blood pressure and low blood pressure anymore. It's between being an informed participant in your own care or being passively medicated toward a number that was never designed for your body. Every day you wait to have this conversation with your doctor is a day your morning dizziness goes unexplained. But every day you advocate for individualized care is a day your brain and your body get what they actually need. Your future self is counting on the decisions you make in the next 24 hours. You now have the research-backed blueprint to walk into your next appointment with confidence, ask the right questions, and refuse to be treated like a number on a chart. If this gave you clarity, if it answered something you've been wondering about, or gave you the language to finally push back, leave a comment below. Tell me what you learned. Tell me what question you're bringing to your doctor. Tell me what your orthostatic test showed. We are always listening, and every single comment matters to us. Thanks so much for watching. This video is for educational and informational purposes only, and is not intended as medical advice. Blood pressure management should always be individualized in collaboration with your healthcare provider, based on your complete medical history, current medications, and functional status. Never adjust or discontinue medications without consulting a qualified physician.